Hello there, welcome to Saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground. Now in 1995, James Bond returned with a bang to the big screen with Goldeneye. It had been 6 years since a James Bond film had been released, more than double the biggest gap that had ever been between Bond films since 1962. But despite a fantastic cast including Famke Janssen, Sean Bean, Robbie Coltrane and of course Pierce Brosnan, the film plays second fiddle to its own video game, Goldeneye 007 on the Nintendo 64. And I'm not just saying that for a quirky intro. Goldeneye as a movie was very good, it was very successful. And its all-star cast garnered a relatively good score even now looking back on things like IMDb and Wikipedia Rotten Tomatoes. But the game, including the same cast by the way as you can see from the roster here, garnered substantially higher scores. Whilst normally video games based on movies struggle to live up to the success of the film, in this situation the film doesn't really live up to the success of the game, and the term Goldeneye is more synonymous with this piece of media than the movie itself. When Goldeneye was released in 1997, only 5 months after the birth of the Nintendo 64 console itself, it was a big shift for Nintendo. Whilst Nintendo had long since established a clear dominance in the ongoing rivalry with Sega, the PlayStation, now 2 years old as a console, had established itself as something much cooler for teenage and adult audiences. With the Xbox also only a few years away, Nintendo needed to step up and make edgier games. Whilst their 3D, cartoony, animated games, family-friendly fun was still going to be a big part of their franchise, they needed to create something that had more of an edge to it. And whilst games such as Mission Impossible and Turok Dinosaur Hunter did that to a degree, it was GoldenEye 007 that really gave the Nintendo 64 a solid console-exclusive game that everyone had to play. If you're picking up on a sense of bias in this so far, it's probably justified. This was a game I spent many hours playing when it was first released on the Nintendo 64. I played it both solo as well as many hours sunk in playing with friends, and I can't deny how positively I feel about it, but we're still going to try and break this down and give it as fair a review as possible. Whilst the fact that GoldenEye 007 is a first-person shooter might give you the impression that it plays similar to games such as Turok Dinosaur Hunter, Doom, and other games of that kind, the reality is quite far from that. Whilst there are moments when you stand there brandishing 2 machine guns, blasting the hell out of everybody, the reality is, those are usually the moments where you've messed up, or where things have not gone according to plan. On the whole, GoldenEye 007 rewards you being tactful, being stealthy. Utilising a pistol and a pistol with a silencer will garner very different results, for example. If you make too much noise, or you don't prevent someone from setting off an alarm, you're going to be confronted with hordes of enemies charging in, and whilst that may seem a little bit more fun, the reality is if you want to complete the game, and especially on harder difficulties, that ain't gonna work. Yes, if you play it on easy, where all you've got to do is grab a cassette tape and get out of the base, you'll probably get by okay, wielding 2 machine guns and blowing up everything you see. But later on harder difficulties, when you've got a whole list of objectives to achieve, you're going to need to creep around and use a bit of discretion. For James Bond enthusiasts, it was even more crucial to play this game, as a number of missions and levels in this game are based on things that were cut from the final movie, meaning that playing this game gives you a fuller understanding of the story than the film itself does. There are over 20 different weapons to access in the game, and whilst many of them will turn up over and over again, some are very difficult to access or are only seen in 1 or 2 levels. And everything from the layout of the levels, the type of weapons you access, makes every level feel different. The missions don't have the same repetition that most games do. Hell, in Doom it's get the right key and get out. In Goldeneye, every single mission, every single level every weapon you pick up feels slightly different. One minute you're walking around using a sniper rifle, the next thing you're in a goddamn tank. And remember, at this time, first-person shooter games were almost exclusively seen on PCs, and they were very much in that Doom clone mentality. This was something completely different, far more alive, bright, fun to play, while still being entertaining and visceral enough that teenagers were going to love it. But when you add the multiplayer mode to this, that made the game something extra special. Having a multiplayer shoot-'em-up game, first-person shooter game that is, on a console was pretty much unheard of, and especially the quality that this showed. You had multiple game modes in multiplayer mode, each of them named after different James Bond films, such as The Man with the Golden Gun or You Only Live Twice. And whilst, yes, dividing the screen into 4 meant that most of us with very moderately sized televisions were sitting right up next to the screen just to be able to see it, that's something we just accepted back then. So while this is kind of a pointless question to ask, how was Goldeneye 007 received on its release? Well, I doubt many of you will be too surprised to know that it was a massive success. The game garnered scores usually in the mid-90s, in fact, going across the whole internet I could only find one score below 90%, and that was still an 8.5 out of 10, hardly a fail. The game had pretty low expectations on its release. Hell, most people knew that movie games weren't always that successful, and this game was coming out quite a bit after the film, so people didn't expect it to sell very well. It was, however, released not long before the next Bond film was due to come out, probably a very deliberate marketing tactic. In 1998 alone, it sold 2.1 million copies, and overall, by the time the game was all said and done, it had sold 8 million units. That's pretty damn successful, and in fact, it ended up being the 3rd most popular game on the Nintendo 64, behind only Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64. When those are the only 2 games that beat you, you know you've made it big. The game unsurprisingly received high praise for the beautiful graphics, the colourful and varied environments, and special effects such as smoke, fire, and breaking glass. There was also high praise for the movement of the characters, the realism involved, and the smooth transition between cutscene and actual level gameplay. The praise wasn't universal. Electronic Gaming Monthly actually felt that the graphics were quite choppy and sluggish. I'm not sure where this particularly comes from, but it is worth noting. The game would go on to win a handful of awards, but most notably a BAFTA award for interactive entertainment, and if there's one thing that could potentially be even more impressive than that, is that the game was even displayed in the Smithsonian Museum. That is pretty high praise. But how does the game stand up now? How does it hold up to modern scrutiny? Well, after Goldeneye was released, there were so many attempts to recapture the magic. The Nintendo 64 released Tomorrow Never Dies, which was a sort of spiritual successor to it, but it really just didn't quite live up to the original. Since then, the PlayStation and Xbox, and even the Nintendo Wii themselves have made attempts to create a GoldenEye 007 sequel or reimagining, and none of them have ever come close to the success or the love that this game received. And is that because this game is perfect and infallible? Well, no, it's not. And maybe, in many ways, the reason that people were so desperate to create an updated and reimagining version of this game is because the game hasn't actually aged perfectly, despite what we might like to convince ourselves. The graphics, once considered lofty and beautiful, damn near an inspiration for other games, are now quite clunky and, dare I say it, ugly at times. I don't mean the levels, the layout, but certainly when you get close up to some of these characters, the awkward shapes of their heads are kinda comical now. But for many people who maybe haven't played the game in quite a while, the one thing that stands out as most jarring are the controls. They have aged like a fine cheese. I think maybe for some people that played it all along, they won't notice this issue, but certainly for those people that hadn't played the game in a long time but recently downloaded it on the Nintendo Switch, it was certainly something that a lot of people commented on. The controls initially almost feeling unplayable. Part of that could be due to the porting, or perhaps the controls of the Nintendo Switch just not fitting the game quite as well as those of the Nintendo 64 did. However, that's not 100% the case. You see, the first time I played this game after a lengthy absence from it was on my original Nintendo 64, and even I found the controls a little bit tricky to come to grips with. However, it has to be said that once you've been playing the game for a little while, you sink right back into it, and the controls become far easier to manage, assuming you've been able to take the time to sit through it. And whilst the graphics may not have aged perfectly, the level layout certainly has, and even the movement of the characters. It's just well, let's be honest, it's the heads. The heads look hideous and scary. The music, on the other hand, is still incredible. It's absolutely breathtaking just how well the music in this game stands out. Not just the music, but the sound effects. The shots of the weapons firing are absolutely superb. The missions are still a great deal of fun to play, and varied enough that even now you're not going to get bored. However, I suppose the question I really have to ask myself is, if I didn't already have a love for this game, would I enjoy playing it now as much as I do? And if I'm honest, the answer is probably no. There's a lot to enjoy here, and I think someone playing it for the first time would still have fun, but it probably wouldn't hit with the same resonance as it does for someone who grew up playing the game. That doesn't mean anything bad about it, but like a lot of other gaming styles, the first-person shooter game has evolved and moved on. But for James Bond fans, this is still probably the best one out there today. Whilst first-person shooters have moved on, I think what we have to accept is, despite constant efforts to remake and improve this game, it's never happened because Goldeneye 007 was so exceptional. And despite aging somewhat, I think this game still deserves an 8 out of 10. But what do you think? Comment below, let me know. And until next time, take the high ground.